إني ألقى الإناس في صومي وصلاتي ودعائي للرحمن وجميع الطاعات.
Really, this is from my experience on the comment section on my YouTube channel and on my what do you call it, emails. This is really one of the most oft repeated insults against Muslims. Well, you know, your prophet married a 9-year-old. This kind of things that always comes up. Now, before I start, I do want to put a quick disclaimer that everything that I'm going to be saying right now is going to be for the process or for the purposes of academic discussion. Yeah. So I'm going to be going into a bit of philosophy, a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of sociology, a little bit of history, and then afterwards I'll come back to the reality. Yeah. Listen to what I'm going to say. The first question you have to ask is, who is asking that question? Because from my experience, there's 2 or 3 main groups of people who could ask it based on the world demographic. It could be an atheist that's asking you that question. Why did your prophet marry a 9-year-old? It could be a Christian asking you that question. It could be a Hindu asking you that question. So the first thing you have to ask the atheist is the following. You have to ask the atheist, in your opinion, in your estimation, based on your rationality or your means of finding out the truth, how do you attain objective reality or objective morality? Now, if you really push this question to them and you ask them, if you really analyze what the philosophical works of the major atheists say, you'll realize that actually the majority of philosophers that are atheists come to the conclusion that objective morality doesn't exist. And this is something that almost all of the postmodern, if not all of them, all of the postmodern atheists say that. Nietzsche, Bertrand Russell, Jacques Derrida, all of them say this. There is no such thing as objective morality. Now here's the point. If there is no way of the atheist ascertaining a full truth, which is moral, basically, a certain moral truth, then really they have no business asking you any moral question, because their premise is unsubstantiated. This is the point. Now if you put emotion to the side, and you put everything to the side, this is the first point. The second point is as follows. You have to ask yourself, why is it that the atheist, he is over-depending on a 21st century socially constructed, legalistic definition of adulthood? Now let me give you an example of what I'm saying. If you think of the historical era, you'll find that historically, in almost every civilization that has existed, puberty was defining who would be an adult and who wouldn't be. And this is written in many different books. One of them is An Emphatic Civilization, written by Ritskin. He writes that actually the majority of people that in the early, before the 1900s, or before the 19th century, he says that, and that's the 1800s, he says that adulthood was defined by puberty. Now if you look at it from a purely biological perspective, and I'm not saying we should do that, but just for a second, if we look at it from a purely biological perspective, there's a book called The Developing Human, or Human Development, and this book says that the majority of females reach the age of puberty. It's typical for them to reach the age of puberty at the age of 10. This is the biological reality. Now you might think, okay, you're trying to justify, but I'm just saying to you, we're looking at it from a broad perspective. We're not looking at a snapshot of history and anachronistically trying to superimpose an arbitrary, subjective, 21st century legalistic definition of pedophilia on all of the human societies that have ever existed in the past. And if we did, listen to what would happen. Did you know that in the 1880s, in the United States of America, that almost all of the states had the legal age for marriage as 10 years old? And did you know that Delaware had it at 7? So, what you have to see from an objective philosophical perspective is that this, what you call anachronistic reasoning of superimposing a legalistic definition on previous generations and dispensations is unsubstantiated from an anthropological perspective. If you look at Clifford Geertz, who's a well-known anthropologist, he says that really you've got to think of it, when you look at a society, you have to analyze the thick description of that society. You can't. This is an anthropological fallacy when you try and put one society's ideas onto another. This is ridiculous scholarship. It would not be tolerated in the academic world. Yet they use it out of frustration and aggravation, not realizing that it actually was the norm. Now, you might argue, so why is it now that, I mean, we couldn't, let's be honest, as adult people here, imagine going into a primary school, taking out a child from year 5, and saying, let's get him married, We wouldn't imagine it. It's something that we would really have to de-scope our cultural paradigm in order to understand that. But that is what is required in order for scholarship to take place. That is how the world worked. Pedophilia, when it was written in the dictionary and defined thus, is a very recent thing, and is a product of 20th century thought. And in addition to that, let me tell you something. That really, there is a psychological element, and I said I'd be going all over the social sciences. There is a psychological element. Like, for example, Jeremy Bruner, he says that adulthood, because we said that biologically, it's very, very possible for a person to become an adult at the age of 9 or 10 or 11. From they can reach the age of puberty at that age, is absolutely possible. But from a psychological perspective, there's a massive difference of opinion as to what constitutes quote-unquote maturity. Now, Bruner, for example, he says that it depends on, he says it depends on the period of play, how long kids play. Independent play, not any play, but play. Because play actually has a very deep psychological educational functionality. When you play, you're interacting with the extraneous variables of the world, you're recognizing how to deal with the objects around you. Piaget, who's another psychologist, he says, no, it's more to do with logos, and he had this very famous bottle experiment that he did, and other experiments were made, and different psychologists have different understanding. But really, if you think about it, so it does make sense, because now we're living in the age of technology and, in the industry and stuff like that, for kids to have an extended period of play. Why? Because there's more to experiment with, there's more technology and stuff like that. So, I mean, I can see the justification, I'm not saying I can't see the justification, for adulthood moving from, let's say, 7 years old, because that was the norm, that was absolutely the norm, to, let's say, 12, 13, 14, I can see the justification in that. And by the way, the Sharia of Islam, it doesn't not take into account the cultural variables. In fact, in usul al-fiqh, which is the principles of jurisprudence, there is a qaida, there's a principle that says al-'urf muhakkam, that culture has a lot to, is something which is borne into consideration when you make a decision. And moreover, there is another principle, la darar wa la darar, which is actually a hadith. You can't cause harm to yourself or anyone else. Therefore, we wouldn't say today, like, let's go back to the old days. Let's have 7-year-old adults. No, I'm not saying we should do that. Our religion has an inbuilt flexibility which deals with social and cultural change. But what I am saying to the atheist directly, because it's usually the atheist, now go to the Christian quickly. What I'm saying to him directly or her is that you cannot, under your worldview, do two things. Number one, you cannot superimpose your legalistic definition, which has depended upon the Western paradigm and the cultural atmosphere in the West, and superimpose it on all the other historical societies. You can't do that. That is not an academic exercise. That is called, it's basically, you're painting everything with the same brush. And it's not something which is scholarly or something which is academically, it doesn't have any currency. Number two, you have no reason. Now, as for the Christian, when he comes forward and he says the same thing, but we have objective morality because we have the Bible. So look at the Bible. Look at Numbers chapter 31, verse 18. Just go to that, and look at the old commentaries. Forget about what I say. Forget about what your apologists say. Just look at what the rabbinical commentaries say about that. Numbers 31, 18. what you can do with the young girls, prepubescent ones. It's not marriage. You can take them for yourselves. Look at what it says in Deuteronomy 21, 10 to 13, 14. Take a look at that. Say, that's the Old Testament. But this is the God of the Old Testament, is the God of the New Testament. You should accept him. And Jesus says, I've not come to do away with the law of the prophets. I've come to affirm them. So, if you look at the Bible, and you compare it with the Quranic discourse, actually the Quranic discourse is much more strict in terms of this. This is the irony of all ironies. The people that are criticizing Muslims and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are the very people that don't have any leg to stand on. If you think about it really deeply, you'll find that those individuals that are criticizing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are criticizing the very man who came with the Sharia from Allah, we believe, that basically stipulates restrictions in marriage with youngsters, prepubescents. And their law systems don't have any such restrictions. The atheistic paradigm has no such restriction on an objective level. Christianity has no such restriction, historically speaking. Judaism has no such restriction. Hinduism, look at Mahabharata, or whatever how you would call it. Mahabharata, yeah? This book of the Hindus says that one of their major gods had 1,000 child sex slaves. 1,000 child sex slaves. What religion does what Islam does and gives us restrictions? What world system can you put forward that has more restriction against marrying someone who's a youngster than Islam? In fact, they're throwing stones. They're throwing big, heavy stones. But they fail to know and realize that they live in an incredibly fragile, weak glass house. And that is the reality of the situation. So don't let modern 21st century thought encompass you from every direction. Extrapolate yourself. Seriously, extrapolate yourself from that. Realize that you are being bombarded with Western thought. Now we accept some of it is good, but it's not justifiable to attack the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ for doing something that your system allows on an exacerbated level today, which our system doesn't. So that is the irony of all ironies. And I think, is there anything you want to add to that? Or? Yeah.
Just to touch up on it as well, if you guys, by the way, I took my shoes off here, I just feel a bit more comfortable. I'm not with. If you guys hated someone, yeah, you hate their guts, you would attack them with everything, yeah? You would want to attack them with every little thing that you see in them. If that's the case, why don't we have a single narration from anyone, the enemies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, yeah? These people that hate the Prophet, peace be upon him, they could never hate the Prophet more than Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab. Has any of them ever come and said, hey, why are you marrying a young girl for? Has any of them ever come in history and come and said, hey, let's use this against him? We call him a magician, we call him a poet, we call him this and that. Why did they not use this against him? Because it was the norm of the society. You can't deny it was the norm of that society. It's like today, if we go get a lady in a bikini, yeah? For example, I'm just giving an example, yeah? And talk to those agents. You know, these guys are mad. Like, do you get what I'm trying to say? Because today it's become like a norm. So, from that perspective, you can use that as well. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, like, if he wanted to do that, you know, why is it that he just picked Aisha radiallahu anha? Why didn't he keep doing it? Why was he married to one woman for such a long time? There's reasons behind it. Just because one thing that's really crucial, brothers and sisters, is that I was speaking to one sister, she messaged me on Instagram, and she said, I'm on the verge of leaving Islam, yeah? And I said, look, sister, okay, what's the problem? I got doubts. I said, no problem. I said, let me come and meet you, inshallah, in public. I said, I'll bring my wife as well. We sat down, I said, just whatever you've got written down, let's just go through it. Every single point by point, and the ones that I know. The ones I don't know, I said, I don't know, I'll look into it, yeah? It's just, the thing is, it's just that she just has these things because she's living in a Western society and her friends are bombarding her with this. Just because you do not see the wisdom, I'm being honest, one thing doesn't make sense to me is that, for example, that if, for example, I'm just giving an example, it just doesn't make you completely right. If I just wanted to know what's going to happen, why am I here? Yeah? I try to go around to arguments. We have a few arguments we can deal with as well. But there's things that you're not going to understand. But you leaving your religion because of that is stupid. No offense to anyone here. It's not right. Why? Because on the day of judgment, I'm not going to leave my... As far as I know, okay, Allah exists, there's evidence for that. The Quran is from Allah. The Prophet Muhammad is his final messenger book. Okay, that solidifies my iman. Things that I don't understand and grasp, you need to understand. Just because I don't see the wisdom, doesn't mean there's no wisdom. If a child is running to the fire and I kick the child, yeah, just to save the life, yeah? I'm just kicking the save life for a camera. The child is going to think, this guy is evil, disgusting. He's going to start swearing, I'm not saved your life. Yeah? You know, I saved your life. But for the child, he sees the pixel. Allah has the picture. So don't leave, don't have shubahas because of this. Because on the day of judgment, I can inshallah stand in front of Allah and all of us, and may Allah grant us all Jannah, and say, oh Allah, I didn't understand this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will explain it. We'll be like, okay. So do you get what I'm trying to say? Then it will sink in and you will understand. Is it worth leaving your religion over something doubtful? We shouldn't, we should understand that there's things that we're not going to understand fully, but have trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyways,